Hello. So there is a 30-day challenge for Dungeons and Dragons for the month of September because September has 30 days. And so I'm going to try and abide by that. This is going to be complicated a little bit because next week I am going to Denver for a conference. So I won't be able to upload videos while I'm there. So what I think I'll do is for that week I'll upload the videos early, I guess. I guess I could upload them early. Anyway, I have not read through this list, so what I'm going to do is read through this list, and then I will answer the first question, because today is day one. So, day one, how you got started, favorite playable race, favorite playable class, favorite game world, favorite set of dice or individual die, favorite deity spelled wrong, favorite edition, favorite character you have played, favorite character you haven't played, craziest thing that's happened that you saw to a party, character, your players, etc. Favorite adventure you have ran, favorite adventure you have run, should it be run. Man, this is a picture, so I am not in control of how it's spelled. Let's see, have ran, favorite dungeon type or location, favorite trap puzzle, favorite NPC, favorite monster undead, aberration, spelled wrong, animal, vermin, immortal, outsider, elemental, plant, humanoid, natural, fey. So the very fact that it says favorite monster, aberration, animal, vermin, all that tells me that whoever made this is like a 3.0 guy. Let's see, favorite dragon color or type, favorite monster overall, least favorite monster overall, favorite energy type, favorite magic item, favorite non-magic item, character you want to play in the future, a character that you will never play ever again. What is the number you always seem to roll on a d20, and the best DM you've had? Okay, so today is how you got started. Based on the answers to some of these are not necessarily going to be long videos. Some of them will be short. So as far as how I got started. So back in 5th or 6th grade, I believe, maybe 4th grade, somewhere in my later elementary school life, my brother and I were rooting around in the garage, and there was a big box, like a really big box, and inside that box there were a bunch of like board games and other things that my dad owned, and down in there was a box set for D&D. There was also a box set of Gamma World. There were some magnet toys, which they would never be able to sell in today's world, but back then, the toys were from the 70s based on the dates on the box, but they were these little magnetized metal rails and what have you, and then when you put it all together, you could roll ball bearings or marbles through it. There were other things you could do with it, but I can tell you that because they were magnetized, you'd never see them made and sold today. A couple other things in there, but the big one that caught our attention was the D&D and Gamma World stuff, and D&D more so than the Gamma World at that time, because my brother and I were very much into medieval knights and chivalry and dragons and stuff. So we had pulled out this was the Holmes Basic Set, if I remember correctly. It's the blue book with the dragon on the cover. And we read through the rules in that book. And what was weird is, if you don't know how D&D started, the original D&D, the very, very first D&D, was a set of 3 books called the Little Brown Books. And they were called Men in Magic, Monsters and Treasure, and The Underworld, I believe were the names of the 3 books. My dad didn't have those. My dad had Supplement 1 Greyhawk, Supplement 2 Blackmore, Supplement 3 Deity... Well, what was 3? 4 was Deities and Demigods. Deities, Demigods, and Heroes. I can't remember exactly what 3 was. But my dad had the 4 supplements, which were the add-on rules. He also had the Blue Book Basic Set. D&D and D&D Basic were kind of like the original D&D. The original rules were were kind of morphed into what was then later called D&D Basic or Basic D&D. And at around the same time, the late 70s, you had Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Now, if you ever saw the old D&D books prior to 3rd and 4th edition coming out, you might have noticed that they were called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and that was to differentiate them from Basic Dungeons and Dragons. Advanced had a lot more rules, a lot more options, and to the best of my knowledge was more widespread and played, although a lot of what are called grognards, the old school D&D guys, a lot of them played Basic as well. But we had the supplement books for original D&D. We had the basic rule book, which was the blue book with dragons, and we had the player's handbook and monster manual for AD&D. We also had Chainmail. Not Chainmail, I'm sorry, Swords and Wizardry, which was Swords and Wizardry, I believe was what it was called, which was the fantasy mod for Chainmail Rules, which was a tabletop war game. Every single one of these was a different thing. The supplements, Basic D&D, AD&D, and Sword and Wizardry were all for 4 different types of, essentially 4 different games. But we didn't know that, so we combined them all together. You'd read the basic rule book, the blue book, and it would only tell you how to create characters up to level 3. And then in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook, now you had rules from level 1 to 20. And it explained in more detail what exactly your ability scores did, and what all the spells were, and all the different races and classes and what have you. And so, but the blue book had an adventure in it. So for rules, we used the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook, but we ran the adventure that was in the blue book, and there was also another adventure called B1, In Search of the Unknown. That's a basic Dungeons and Dragons adventure, not necessarily to be played with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And we would run that adventure using the AD&D rules as well. So my brother and I had those 2 books, and we would make characters and what have you. When I got into 7th grade, I met 2 guys. One guy named Neil, another guy named John. I forget what the third guy's name was, but he was in a different class than us. And they had the original Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition rule books as well. So when we got with them, we would play games, and this was at school. So my brother was in the grade behind me, so he didn't get to participate in the first year like I did. But me, Neil, John, the other guy, we would run games for each other during our lunch breaks. And we would also, I remember one class, we were watching a movie in class for something, and we said, screw that, and we all went and sat in the back of the room and played D&D instead. Now, back then, we didn't have the dice, or we did kind of have the dice, but we wouldn't bring them to school. Partly because they'd get lost, partly because we didn't want to get in trouble for having dice at school, even though, we weren't playing craps or anything in the back of the classroom. So we would have this system where you would either describe what was going on, and then the DM would just decide if you hit or not. Or we would do this thing where you would pick a number. The DM would have a number in mind, and you pick a number. And then depending on how far away from the DM's number you were, would determine, whether or not you hit. So we would play the game that way. Then in 9th grade, I joined, actually in 8th grade, I was on the National Academic League team at my school. And that's when I met my best friend, Chuck. And one day, we were having a National Academic League match, and it was in the library at our school. And we won the match, which was great. And afterwards, I made a reference. Now, this was before Chuck and I were hanging out. We just knew each other on the team. I made a reference to the Crown, Orb, and Scepter of Good and Evil, which is an artifact-level magic item in D&D, and he recognized the reference. Now, I got part of it wrong when I might have said, the Crown, Scepter, and something else, or the Crown, Orb, and something else, or what have you, and he corrected me on it, which meant, geek to geek, we were speaking the same language. And so that's when Chuck invited me to the library on weekends, because he had 2 other friends at school that played D&D, Pat and Sean. And I said, hey, I play D&D. My brother also knows how to play D&D, so we'll come to the library too, and we can play D&D on the weekends, and that'd be awesome. The very first weekend, now this is what, despite all the playtime that I did with Neil and John in that, this was the first time we were going to actually sit down and roll dice and play kind of legit with another group of people. So this is what I consider my quote-unquote first game of D&D. So the very first weekend that we were supposed to meet, Chuck is at the library, but Sean and Paul couldn't make it. Not Paul, Sean and Pat. I don't know why I said Paul. Paul is actually our other very, very nerdy friend at school, but he didn't play D&D. Pat was the friend who played D&D. Sean and Pat couldn't make it for whatever reason. My brother decided he wasn't going to play D&D. He was going to stay home and play StarCraft 1 on Battle.net, because this was when we had the internet at home. So he was on Battle.net playing. So I was the only one that showed up. So Chuck and I, Chuck DM'd, and I played my very first character, a Dwarven fighter, in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. And my Dwarven fighter's name was Worf Nichiobi. Worf because I loved Star Trek, and Worf and dwarf rhyme. Nichiobi because I was studying Japanese, and Nichiobi meant Sunday. Doshite Nichiobi. Why Sunday? I don't know. Chuck actually also studied Japanese, and he lent me the book that I got that from. So Worf Nichiobi traveled into a cavern, defeated a crawling claw, which is basically the thing from Addams Family. It's just a disembodied hand that crawls around on the floor and then actually has like claws and would claw at you and scrape you and damage you. So I defeated a couple crawling claws and I want to say it was an orc, like wizard or shaman or cleric or something like that. Back in 2nd edition, they were called priests. But I defeated an orc, and I took his treasure, which included a magical oil. And I said, what is it, oil of Olay? And Chuck said, yes, it is. And so I applied the oil of Olay to my skin, and Worf's charisma was increased. Yay! So that is how I got started in the D&D. My brother and I messed around with the books. Then I started playing just collaborative storytelling for the most part with Neil and John. And then with Chuck, finally got down, started rolling dice, playing the game. The next week, after that first week, everybody showed up. And we played D&D every week. Well, not necessarily every weekend, but regularly on the weekends all through high school. Until, after high school when people went to college and everything like that. So that is how I got my start in D&D. And tomorrow we will learn what my favorite playable race is. Hint, hint. Until then, bye-bye.